Welcome to the Qualified Tutor podcast. Here at QT, our mission is to provide teacher training for tutors. If you are a motivated tutor and you love to learn, the QT podcast will inspire, motivate, and support you to improve your practice. Because tutoring is a small job that makes a big difference. Welcome to our next episode of the Qualified Tutor podcast. Today I'm joined by Susannah Hardyman, founder and CEO of Action Tutoring. We are incredibly excited and lucky to have Susannah on today. Susannah is incredibly busy in this time in particular, and it's a really good opportunity for us at this point to hear from a project, an organisation like Action Tutoring. Action Tutoring has really a very simple idea, fundamentally, partnering highly skilled tutoring volunteers, of which there are many, with the more disadvantaged students in this country, of which also there are very many. So a very simple idea. It's been going for 4 or 5 years now, and very, very successful. And we are very lucky to be joined by Susannah. So hello, Susannah. How are you doing today?
Hello, really good, thank you. Enjoying the sunshine. Enjoying the sunshine
while it lasts, exactly. And have you been much busier in this period then?
Yes, I think for two reasons really. One, that work has changed dramatically in the last few weeks, both in terms of thinking through what the longer term future looks like and trying to respond more immediately as best we can to the current crisis. The other big factor for me is I have a nearly 3-year-old at home. So my husband and I are now juggling the childcare and figuring out what some kind of new routine looks like, yes. Doing both childcare and work full time.
Yes, okay. And how is that working so far? You've been able to find a good balance?
Yeah, we found a fairly good balance. He's probably watching a little bit more television than he would otherwise, but I think that's probably true of most children across the country.
Sorry, I thought you were talking about your husband there.
my 3-year-old.
Three-year-old, yes.
I think my colleagues are just getting very used to a small person popping up on video calls, but I think they rather like that.
Yes. No, in our podcast a couple of episodes ago, we had a young one coming in every 10 or so minutes. So I think it's key to be able to adapt to things like that, isn't it? So we have a great question that we'd love to start with, Susannah, which is what kind of student were you, and did you ever have a tutor yourself?
I have to admit I was probably a bit of a geeky student, fairly conscientious and hardworking. I wasn't exactly a rebel. But yes, I did have a tutor, and I think really that's probably been quite foundational in sparking my interest around the impact tutoring can have, and particularly sort of some of the inequalities around it in terms of who can access it. So I went to a state primary school, but my parents paid for me to have tutoring to help me get through the 11 plus so that I could go to the local grammar school. This was down in Wiltshire in Salisbury. And in my year group at primary school, about 12 of us sat the 11 plus, and only 2 of us out of that classroom passed. And the 2 of us that passed were the only 2 that had private tutoring. And I think even at the age of 11, I felt a real, I was quite aware even at that young age of a sort of injustice around that, hang on a minute, we've had all this extra support through this private tutoring to help us pass the 11 plus. I didn't feel my fellow pupils at school were sort of necessarily any less intelligent than me, but they just hadn't had access to that same support to help them through that exam in the same way. And yet the trajectory that can set you on is very, very different. So I think, that experience of both really enjoying the tutoring and seeing the difference that it made for me has really stuck with me, and I'm sure was a sort of foundational reason about why I was so passionate about trying to sort of do something about the inequality of tutoring and make it more widely available.
Yeah, okay, exactly. So do you think it was largely those kind of reasons that you've just talked about? Are those the reasons why Action Tutoring came about, or was it inspired by something else you experienced kind of later on?
So I think that was definitely a factor. The other one was actually when I first graduated. This was quite a few years ago now, but when I first graduated and moved to London, I started doing some private tutoring. To be completely honest, I was working in the charity sector, and I jumped on the private tutoring bandwagon to earn some extra money, but also I was quite missing the sort of academia. I'm quite an academic person, and I was missing some of that sort of academic rigor. So I also sort of started doing it because I really enjoyed it, and the teaching side of it, particularly at A-level and so on. But I live in southeast London, in Peckham, and a decade or so ago, Peckham wasn't quite the trendy area that it is now. And I was also doing some voluntary youth work in Peckham with children from really quite deprived, disadvantaged backgrounds. And yet at the same time, on other evenings, I was going to these incredibly huge houses in West London and doing all this private tutoring from children from far more affluent backgrounds. And again, that sort of real inequality just really struck me of the differences of those experiences, that these children in Peckham weren't any less able or less capable, but they just didn't have access to the resources that the children I was tutoring elsewhere did. And I think that was the sort of defining moment of, I want to do something about this. I'm sure there are tutors out there like me that would be willing to tutor for free. Perhaps there's scope for an organisation around this.
Yeah, and actually that point you just mentioned about certain students not having access to resources is even more prominent kind of in the last 2 months or so. And kind of on that note, how do you think projects like a qualified tutor, providing a course for tutors to learn how to kind of use their profession, how do you think projects like Action Tutoring and Qualified Tutor can facilitate e-learning, can make use of e-learning to help the more disadvantaged students?
I mean, I think we're going to be needed more than ever, whether it's working online or working face-to-face again when we can. But I think many policymakers are already saying that the attainment gap is only going to get even wider through this crisis. Disadvantaged young people were already 18 months behind their wealthier peers by the end of secondary school. And yet, during this time of lockdown, some pupils are having amazing access to online tutoring and parents are enforcing home learning and so on. And for others, they just haven't got that kind of support or resources. I mean, a few weeks ago, some didn't even have laptops. And that's been the first thing that schools have needed to do, is make sure that everybody's got the equipment so they can at least log on at home. So I think it's inconceivable that the current crisis isn't going to make that attainment gap even bigger than it is already. And therefore, organisations like us and you and many others out there are going to be needed more than ever to help these pupils to catch up.
Yeah, exactly. And it's really I guess what we can do is we can provide affordable resources, can't we? That's resources both in kind of terms of materials and also resources in terms of tutors who are able to provide that learning, because it's all well and good being given the booklets and being given the kind of homework from school, but if you're not able to have someone to talk through that with, or if, as you say, you don't have a parent or guardian who can go through that with you, then really you're just as stuck. We've Julia Silver, the founder of the QT, was talking recently about how booklets are all well and good, but they need to have some kind of application to them, otherwise they lose their force, they lose their effectiveness. But just for those listeners of ours who maybe aren't quite so aware, can you give us an idea of what you mean by educational disadvantage specifically?
Yeah, so this is the difference in how young people do in their GCSEs based on their economic background, which is broadly broken into those eligible for free school meals, which means they come from a family background of 16,200 a year or less as the family income. At least I think that was the latest figure on it. So those children eligible for free school meals, how they perform in their GCSEs against how everybody else performs. And there's a really big dip in the percentages between how the wider cohort perform versus those disadvantaged pupils. And that's measured both at the end of primary school and at the end of secondary. There is already a gap. It's about 11 percentage point gap at the end of primary school. Yeah. And that gap is shown to only get bigger and bigger through secondary school. So by the end of secondary school, it's actually about a 30 percentage point difference in attainment, which is absolutely huge. And it's also actually one of the biggest in the developed world. So other countries other countries do significantly better at narrowing that gap. There have been some really good efforts over recent years to try and tackle that, particularly with the introduction of pupil premium funding. So schools now get additional money for every pupil eligible for free school meals, to try and support them to put in place interventions and support for pupils.
Yeah.
But as I was saying earlier, that's only going to be needed more than ever to help pupils catch up. And, your point about, workbooks alone don't cut it, I think is so valid. I was speaking to a head teacher the other day who said to me, we're suddenly expecting parents to become teaching assistants.
Become teachers, yeah.
Certainly to become teaching assistants, if not teachers. And some of them might have the education, the skills and the time and the motivation to be able to do that. But others, for all sorts of complicated reasons, might not, particularly if they're needing to work themselves. Perhaps they're a key worker still working. Perhaps they're living in cramped accommodation. Perhaps they've only got one laptop between 4 children. There might be all sorts of reasons. Yeah. Or even that English isn't the parents' first language and they're struggling to understand the material. So there can be all sorts of reasons why it's not easy for parents to suddenly fill that gap. But you're absolutely right. Just being given a workbook or a video to watch isn't enough, and it's really hard to replicate. The role that a teacher would play in a big online classroom.
Yeah, exactly, and really. That's an absolutely key point now, especially as kind of parents play such a key role in the overall education of a child. They obviously, the work that a tutor does can be amazing, but that has to be supplemented by work with the parents kind of on a much more regular basis. And obviously teachers form a pillar of a child's education, but that's supplemented by kind of a large amount of conversation between teacher and parent to check how well they're doing, what they can be doing at home. And even though there's a vast number of resources in the aimed at helping parents become teachers at home, I've seen an explosion of that online in the last 2 months. And in the same vein, talking about how necessary tutors are at the moment. What have you seen, Susannah, is the real impact, is the true impact kind of one-to-one tuition for a student?
Oh, I just think it's absolutely transformative. I'm so passionate about it because I think, teachers do the most incredible job. It's not remotely easy being a teacher, particularly in some of the schools that we work in fairly deprived communities and facing sort of really huge challenges around parental engagement and so on. Teachers do the most phenomenal job, but there is a world of difference between teaching a class of 30 with very varying standards of ability and being able to give somebody uninterrupted one-to-one or one-to-two support for an hour. The things we most commonly see is that you can go at the pupil's pace, so you've got time to revisit things they've got stuck on, perhaps really basic but important misconceptions that are meaning they're then getting everything else wrong. You've got time to go back over the basics. You can work at their speed. You can adapt your teaching style to their learning style. And so often what we see is the tutoring just unlocks confidence and motivation, and it breaks down those mental barriers of I'm rubbish at maths, I've never been good at English, and that sort of really negative mindset. Yeah. You can begin to break through that, and suddenly you see pupils saying, I can do maths, actually I'm not rubbish at English, and the confidence come back. And one we often hear is that pupils then say, I now feel confident to put my hand up in the class. I now feel more willing to ask my teacher for help, or I feel more confident to have a go at this on my own. So I think so often it's that shift in mindset and that shift in confidence that's so important, that then unlocks everything else. And that's really hard to replicate without a small group environment.
Yeah, exactly. I'm sure you've seen it yourself. First of all, being a tutor yourself, and then running a charity like Action Tutoring, it is transformative. I think that's the best word to describe it, really. And kind of on that same note, maybe the question I'm about to ask is it really corresponds to the answer you've just given. But what do you enjoy most about what you do, both with Action Tutoring or even outside of that?
I think it is just hearing those individual stories. And I think one of our challenges as we've got bigger, so we now work with 3,000 pupils a year across 8 cities across England. It can be easy for that just to become numbers on a page. But what I absolutely love is hearing the individual stories of the difference it's made, whether from teachers or from our frontline staff or the volunteers. And these days, so much of what I do is about managing a team. It's about strategy. It's about fundraising. But I just absolutely love it when I get the chance to go into a school and visit a session, talk to the pupils, the tutors, and the teachers, and just hear the difference it's making on the ground.
Yeah.
I think the other thing I really love is hearing the volunteers' stories about why they've decided to get involved. And we have volunteers who are students, who are from corporate backgrounds, right through to the retired. So our youngest is 18 and our oldest is 82, which is something we're really, really proud of. And hearing their stories of why they wanted to get involved with our mission, why they're passionate about giving up their time to volunteer as a tutor is always just incredibly inspiring. And for me, really motivating to think I wasn't completely mad thinking there might be people out there that would want to do this. There really are.
Yeah. Well, I guess there is no way of finding that out until you try, and you kind of you took the plunge. You went for it, perhaps maybe without knowing if there was a huge kind of bank of people who are willing to do it. But obviously
that was really the biggest unknown for us. I mean, we were fairly confident that there would be schools that were interested, and we knew there were huge numbers of pupils that met the criteria of being eligible for free school meals that we could work with, but we had no idea really what the appetite from volunteers might be. And we can always use more volunteers for sure. There's always more we could do, but every year we're amazed at how many people come forward and how many people do want to give up their time to do it.
Yeah, exactly. And now the next part of kind of what I just wanted to talk about, I didn't want to kind of have this chat with you, Susannah, and not get onto this bit. And actually you alluded to it very nicely just at the end of what you said there, was kind of the role of the tutor themselves in Action Tutoring. So we've talked obviously a little bit about what this means for disadvantaged students who are able to take advantage of Action Tutoring's resources and tutors. But for the tutor themselves, we here are listening to tutors. We are building a community of tutors who are interested and engaged in gaining high levels of training, making sure that their job is as comprehensively kind of covered as possible. So how do you at Action Tutoring prepare your tutors for the work they do?
Yeah, so everybody has to go through an application process, and just because people are volunteering, it's no guarantee that we'll accept them. They still need to meet certain criteria to ensure that we keep the standard really high and that schools can trust who we're sending in. At that point, people are then invited to come for training. So we meet everybody face-to-face at that training initially, or at least we were meeting them face-to-face until COVID hit. We might be about to start doing that training. We are about to start doing that training online. But they have to then go through training and a DBS check before they can be allocated to a partner school. So there's quite a few hoops to jump through before they get to the point of being allocated to a school. Typically, we would work with about 15 to 20 pupils with a group of about 8 to 10 volunteers at a time. So although people are working either 1-to-1 or 1-to-2, there'll be a number of those small groups going on in a school at the same time. And we provide a program coordinator to supervise all that. So a big part of their role is assuring the quality of the tutors. They provide some ongoing training sessions to the volunteers, and they also do a huge amount around motivating and engaging the pupils and making sure that they attend. We've also developed our own very structured curriculum tailored to the cohort that we work with and to the English and maths curriculum. So we don't expect tutors to just provide their own resources. And again, that's part of our quality assurance. The workbooks we've developed can still very much be tailored to the individual. We don't expect everybody to work through them chronologically. People might jump around different topics depending on their needs. But those resources are there for the tutors to use.
Yeah. Another key part of tutoring itself really is accessing those resources. It's amazing to see how some kind of charities, organizations, agencies provide that and some don't, and it's interesting to hear why they do and why they don't. I think personally as a tutor, alongside what I do with QT as well, it's amazing to see those places that do offer that, because they're able to call on the collective knowledge and experience of everyone who works there to build this bank of resources, rather than kind of individuals trying to collate themselves, not having enough time, spending too much time building resources rather than learning how to teach or learning how to tutor.
Well, the two big drivers for us were we wanted to make it as easy as possible for the volunteer, rather than, as you say, expecting them to spend ages trawling through resources and finding their own. And secondly, we felt it would provide really good quality assurance to the schools. So all of our resources are developed by curriculum experts in English and maths by qualified teachers. And they've been reiterated over the years, taking on board feedback and so on. And they give schools real confidence that we will be working to the curriculum and we will be teaching in the way that they would teach, and that they can really trust that. And
that's the key part there, isn't it? It's building that trust that three-way trust between yourself, between the schools, and between the tutors. Once that three-way relationship is nailed down, then mutually beneficial for all parties. Now, really, the final thing that I wanted to ask Susannah was, you were, as you've mentioned before, you were a tutor yourself, and now you've been working in the tutoring, the education industry for many years. What are your top tips for tutors starting out in the industry? Maybe just out of school or just out of university, or even a bit later, but they've just decided to get into tutoring because they want to be part of this really rewarding role that you've mentioned. What are your top tips for starting out?
Well, I think that's a good question. I think one thing I hear a lot from tutors is that they were really nervous beforehand, nervous what the pupils would be like and whether they would know enough. And I think a big thing I would say is you don't need to be nervous, especially with the resources that we provide and so on, and the supervision and support we provide from our staff team. We'll help you through the process, and we will help you build your confidence. And that actually people always say the pupils are lovely. They normally want the help, they want to learn. And there's always a way to build rapport with them. And I think that's really key, to take the time before you dive into the English and maths or whatever subject you're teaching, but to try and get to know your pupil a little bit, find out what subjects they like, what they're interested in, what their long-term ambitions might be, and just to spend a little bit of time breaking the ice. I think the other thing is it's just really important to try and understand whether it's information you get from the school or from your own assessment, quite where they're at and what are the areas that they really need to focus on. Because I think as soon as the pupil can start seeing that you're adding value and they're coming away from the sessions feeling, oh yes, I've cracked something I didn't know before, their enthusiasm for it will really grow and your confidence will grow too.
Yeah. And I've even noticed, even over the 5 years that I've been tutoring, your confidence, as you say, grows in it, your ability to convey your message, but also the knowledge that what you're doing is helping. I think that's one of the hardest things of being, about being a tutor is, especially if you work one-on-one, maybe with just a couple of students, you may not always get the chance to discuss what you've been through in the sessions with other people, outside of the parent or the tutor or the student. Sorry. So knowing that what you're doing really is helping the student is really what drives you on and what makes you a better tutor. So
that's what brings our volunteers back time and again.
Yeah, it's inspiring them to see that what they're doing is really beneficial to the students. So I think just such useful advice, Susannah, at this time, really, both for those people who are kind of struggling with how to cope with the new conditions that have been laid upon us, but also for tutors who are looking to start out in tutoring. I think that number is, as we've mentioned, is only going to grow. And there really does need to be kind of a system of regulation and guidance in place so that those tutors are given the best advice, led down the right track, and essentially are become better tutors. You Action Tutoring, you've put yourself in a wonderful position to provide guidance to tutors, to students, to parents, but to schools, but also to comment on the current situation of the education industry in the UK. So we are incredibly lucky to have talked to you. I hope you've enjoyed being able to kind of voice those ideas. I always find it's amazing how much more you are able to kind of find out about what you do just by voicing it to someone else. So I hope you've
been great. Thank you.
That. Yeah. Now, just looking ahead to next time, we'll be talking to Vishal Bogaita, from the founder of Educatal, which is this amazing, wonderful platform that gives tutors the ability to create and sell their own courses, which is really bridging the gap these days between the creator and the tutor. So they provide a range of different content, from online video courses to downloadable materials to live sessions with a tutor. So really mixing up the kind of the different facets of teaching, a really multimodal platform. So very, very excited to talk to them, as we have been with you, Susannah. So I thank you once again, and wish you all the very best with Action Tutoring. As I mentioned before to Susannah, I've actually signed up myself recently to Action Tutoring, so I'm very looking forward to getting on board. So speak very, very soon. Thank you, Susannah.
Thank you ever so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks for listening to the Qualified Tutor podcast, where tutors share their expertise to support the tutoring community. We're always looking for motivated tutors to interview on the show. If you'd like to be part of the conversation, get in touch at podcast@qualifiedtutor.org. We'd love to learn from you.